我们通常都会觉得有特殊的口音是一件不好的事情。那借由今天的单元，就让我们来了解一下口音它这一个角色是什么呢？还有转换口音带给我们的好处或者是坏处是什么？Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. Today, we're going to wrap up our series of interviews with our wonderful summer interns, and we're going to do that with Leanne. Leanne has picked a really interesting topic, code switching, which sounds really complicated and it's a linguistic principle, but the reality is it's something that a lot of us as a second language speaker do without consciously thinking about it, but it can create some kind of controversies.
今天就邀请到我们的 intern Liane。那 Liane 她非常特别，她其实人现在在马来西亚，那她是来自马来西亚，但是她在英国念书。那她大概在下个月之后就要回英国了。那现在跟我们是用 Zoom 来连线。她其实呢，对于这个 topic 等于说是来自她的一些 personal experience. Really excited for you to join us today. So hi Liane.
Hi everybody, I'm Leanne and I'm a second year in media and communication in Cardiff University. So today we are talking about code switching and accents. It's actually linked to a lot of my personal experience when I switch between different accents while learning languages and also moving abroad, talking to different people or speaking on different occasions.Because
I know Liane 来自马来西亚有非常多不同的文化，更不用说是 accent, right? 其实在你的人生当中好了，你会不会自己发现说你常常在 switch accent?
其实我现在就正在 switch accent. 我已经是非常自然的就一直在转换我的 accents. 包括是在中文或者是英文都会有这样子的习惯.
Now, I think for most people, they think about, okay, if I'm going to speak another language, especially if I'm going to speak English, there's like a proper accent or I need to have a clear accent.
Yeah.
Usually it's like a British accent or an American accent. But I think when we look into the topic of code switching, it's not just about the accent itself, whether it's an American accent, but there are certain things that people do that we consider code switching, which is when you have one demographic actually try and switch into more of the dominant, not only linguistic, but cultural aspects of a certain language. Could you tell us a little bit more about like what kind of inspired you to grab this topic? Or, you know, what are your experiences as someone who is studying abroad when it comes to switching languages, to code switching? You know, how does that fit into your life?So
it's actually back to when I was in high school. I started to notice I'm not speaking in the typical Malaysian accent when I'm in the English class. And I started to feel a bit guilty because it feels like I am betraying my cultural identity. And I am not sure if I am looking down on my background or something. So it feels a bit weird and that was the time when there are a lot of news from the UK that says we should preserve our regional accents. That's how I started to get into this topic. And then I started to see that I am not switching my accent only when I am speaking English. It also happens when I am speaking Chinese to different people from different parts of the world, or when I'm speaking to maybe elder people, and it all changes my accent.Do
you feel that pressure growing up that you should be switching accent, or let's say you have to have a proper pronunciation or the proper native accent. Do you feel that sort of pressure?
I think it's a very common pressure when we just started to learn a new language. But once you realize, no, it's because I am multilingual, and that is why I am struggling with learning a new language, and I won't be a native speaker ever. So it just takes time, and I'm getting used to it.
I mean, Nick, I have to ask you, how do you feel about this? Like, you're on the other side, 你从美国来台湾，那学中文的这个部分，其实我就发现很多来自国外的人来台湾学中文，他们可能所认知的就是什么叫做正统中文的 accent， 跟什么叫做台湾比较 localized 的 accent. Like, which one did you consciously pick, or is there anything that taught you or forced you to adopt along the way?
I would say my case is a little bit special. It's not just about learning Mandarin or learning Chinese here in Taiwan, but also where you learn it and who you learn it from makes a big difference. So for anyone who's been a long-time listener of the podcast, they probably heard this story. When I first came to Taiwan, I lived in Chiayi, like southern part of Taiwan, a little bit more local, and a large population in Chiayi speaks Taiwanese. So the Chinese that I am exposed to has a slightly Taiwanese language accent to it. And specifically, most of the Taiwanese I spent my time with in the early days of living in Taiwan were nurses who were studying to go to the US. And so my personality comes across very differently in Chinese than in English. In English, you can ask Sherry or other colleagues, I'm a little bit more authoritative and direct. But in Chinese, because a lot of the accent or the eccentricities come across is a little bit girly and a little bit local. So my Chinese doesn't sound as authoritative. My Chinese is a lot more gentle and it's, I guess, more polite than I would be. And so that I wouldn't call it a conscious change, but, you know, a few things that definitely get picked up is some of the mannerisms, you know, adding to a lot of things like, 对啊.
No, you go a lot of, when you understand something.
Right. Or some pronunciation, I would say, is less towards like what you would hear in mainland China, and definitely that instead of 谢谢, like 谢谢. But I don't go to that extreme, but you can see that this is more like a very local Taiwan version of this, where I spent my early days in Taiwan in households or with friends who switch back and forth between Mandarin and Taiwanese a lot.
Yeah.
So that bridge kind of gets blurred a little bit.
I think that's a really great point, because I think 我们生长的环境真的是带给我们很大的影响。那我有点不一样，就是我生长的环境，不知道大家知不知道，我妈妈其实是一位教外国人说中文的老师。那她是比较是早期这种受正统教育的这个老师，所以他们的讲话都是字正腔圆，要讲得非常清楚。所以我从小其实我妈妈会训练我讲中文的时候，拜托你一定要卷舌的时候一定要卷，然后呢那个发音要非常标准。所以我是在那样子的环境长大，所以对我来讲就是你要讲一个语言，那你就要 adapt 它所有它最正统的发音，它的口音，它的腔调。But to be really honest, I think as I'm growing up and traveled to so many different places and lived in a lot of different places, I understand the importance of localization. And because it actually shows that you are trying to connect with people that you're speaking with.
就不只是我们生活的环境会影响，其实是在你学习一个新语言的环境也会有影响。So I used to learn Italian with a bunch of international students, and I could clearly remember I was once sitting beside an Indian girl, and we were learning the days of the week for that lesson. And then it ends up, until now, when I'm speaking Italian and naming the days of the week, I still have a tinge of Hindi accent. Yeah. It's like slightly going up.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So I think it's like sometimes we just pick up things that we didn't actually notice until probably that later on someone pointed out to us, right?
Yeah, there's a funny example I have of that where I knew two twin sisters, not identical twin, but they were fraternal twin sisters. And both of them were English teachers. But one of them had studied her university in the US and the other twin had studied in the UK. So when they both speak Mandarin, they sound the same. As soon as they start speaking English, one of them has an American accent and the other has a British accent. And so it's a very weird thing to watch because it'd be like, you two are sisters, you're twin sisters. One is speaking with a British accent, one is speaking with an American accent. And it's just because they studied. In Mandarin and Chinese, they sound exactly the same.
Yeah. But I think, Liane, 你在其实你找到非常多的 example，也就是当人在 switch accent 或 code switching accents， 这个时候呢，其实大众对他们的一些 perception 可能会改变。那当然我在讲的是很多艺人啦，其实现在非常多的 international celebrities, right? Where they grew up in one place, but they kind of get their fame in another place, and maybe they slowly change their accent to localize to connect with their audience, but there are some criticisms, right?
Yeah, they are. Actually, it comes up quite a lot. Not usually like criticism, but there will be discussions, especially when it's like British stars going to the US.
It's funny sometimes that there are certain stars, whether it's movie or TV stars, that we associate as being an American movie or TV star, but they're British. So one that kind of threw me off, and I continually forget this, is Gillian Anderson, who's most famous for the X-Files. She had another Netflix hit show that she was on. But a lot of her career, she operates in American English. But now she's playing Margaret Thatcher and taking a lot more roles in British TV shows. And you're like, that's weird. Why would they find an American to be Margaret Thatcher? Oh, no, she's not American.
I did not know that until you mentioned it, actually.
Yeah.
那我觉得另外一位呢，不知道大家应该知道吧 Priyanka Chopra 还有一位 celebrity 她是非常著名 Indian celebrity. Her name is Priyanka Chopra. I know that she was like this incredibly famous Bollywood actress, and then she went to the States and definitely earned a lot of fame. But I think people kind of criticized her for switching her accents to a more American accent.
Yeah, they did. And the fact is, I think she did spend quite a lot of time in her early days in the US. So that's how she got to change into accents.
And we had a bit of a discussion before this. It also becomes interesting when some celebrities choose not to make that switch. And there's an argument where, is this cultural appropriation? Is this someone code switching on purpose? But a lot of times, if someone doesn't switch for a clarity purpose, maybe there's another reason why they keep their accent. So I was thinking through is like most of your Taiwanese, Chinese, or Hong Kong actors who go to Hollywood, very few of them lose their accent. Most of them actually keep their accent as they go to the US.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are even a lot of examples where you know that certain actors speaks English really well, but they would choose not to. They would still employ like a translator. So I feel like that's like an intentional choice. Maybe they don't want to seem like they're trying to blend in too much. Maybe they already feel like, I'm comfortable with who I am. I don't have to blend into your culture. So I think like people can make their own choice how they want to identify themselves, especially in a different culture.
I think the next big interesting trend to watch with this is we've sort of seen other countries do their move over. But it's actually the next big one that will be interesting to watch, I think, is Korean. Because as Korean TV stars and pop stars, you obviously have BTS or Blackpink making a scene in the US music scene, but also since Squid Games became a huge hit, a lot of those Korean stars start going to the US. How many of them Because some of them actually already do naturally speak English.
Yeah.
But how many of them will decide whether they maintain a Korean accent or whether they just go into the US and speak what you would consider like more of an American-styled English?
But I think that actually goes back to cultural identity. 因为我觉得韩国这个文化它是非常重视自己本土的这个 identity. And I think even if they're speaking English quite fluently, they will still consciously and consistently bring in their culture and mention their culture or like dishes and try to introduce their culture to other people. And I think because they're doing this so consistently and everyone does that, that's why America actually really love Korean culture. And they really find Korean culture just easy to adopt and then easy to understand, not just like food, but like everything about Korean culture. So I don't know, Leanne, like what do you think about that when it comes to, 比如说当我们在国外的时候好了，我们必须想要，我们想要来推广一下自己的文化，那你会不会借由比如说你的语言啊，或者是一些食物啊，去跟国外的人能够聊一下说，马来西亚是怎么样的文化，那我的口音是为什么会有这样子的口音？ Do you do that often as well in England?
Well, to be honest, I don't really do that with accent itself, but I would intentionally mention, oh, that's how it's here and I'm doing it another way. So that's interesting to see what's similar and what's different. So it could come to cooking or walking, how we go to places and what we do on a free time, or even like shopping. It's a huge difference.
If you were to give advice to other students or other people considering working or studying abroad, when it comes to like this code switching and accent side, would you have any specific advice, or how would you talk to them about, do they need to consider the code switch? Do they need to consider the accent switch, or do you think that they should just sort of stick to how they sound now?
It actually depends on their needs. For example, if they are doing a lot of presentations or they need to speak publicly a lot, maybe they could switch a little bit just for clarity and just to cater their audience. But if they are not doing this, or if they do not need to switch, it's okay if they don't switch. But if they just do it unconsciously, switching the accent, it's also fine. It doesn't mean anything. It's just an unconscious thing that everyone might do.
I think that brings up a really good point when you say when people change their accent or try to be more natives, one of the really big reasons is that you want it to be more clear, right? Because your audience, obviously they understand, the majority of the audience would understand one type of accent. So you want it to be more clear, you want to communicate better. 所以如果站在以这种能够加强沟通的角度来讲，我觉得是没有错的，我们可以尝试的让我们的口音能够更正统一点，更发音更清楚一点，这样子当然我们的听众跟观众更了解我们要讲什么。但如果我们在一个某个情况之下，其实呢不用一定要 switch accent 的话， just like you said, then it's really okay, like just do it proudly, right? Get your own accent, it's fine, you know, have pride because that's your cultural identity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also agree that a lot of this is next to your cultural identity, but then another key point that Leanne brought up is that sometimes you just have to identify when clarity matters the most.
Yeah.
That may not mean completely switching or dropping your native accent, but it may be like downplaying it a bit. So one example I have of this is, funny enough, in the conversation about code switching and accent switching, is a surprising number of Spider-Mans are British, not American. So Tom Holland is British, Andrew Garfield is British. But you will find that certain UK or European actors will downplay their accent a bit. They will not completely remove it. But one big example would be Idris Elba, who plays a lot in Hollywood, but also British. So it's funny enough, like my first exposure to him was The Wire, where you assume like, yeah, that dude's American. But when you hear him speak, and you hear him speak, we'll say fully naturally, he has a much stronger accent than you would assume. But then when you watch him on talk shows, he doesn't drop his British accent, but you will find certain things that he says, it's probably not as strong as how he just talks normally. Another person, one of Idris Elba's early castmates from my favorite TV show, The Wire, Dominic West, who's famous for The Wire. He was in 300. He had won a few awards for The Affair, the TV show, from Ireland. If he speaks in his Irish accent, even for me, it's really hard to understand him. Like, it's really hard to understand. So you'll find in interviews, he has a tendency to downplay it a bit. He doesn't go full American, but he will like hold back a little bit. And so you will see people, for the purposes of clarity, not just we're talking like second language speakers, but you will find for certain accents, people will pull it back a bit to be clear.
I just thought, although they are accents that is considered more clear and easier to communicate, there's still no standard accent. There might be certain accents that is easier to adapt for foreigners or second language speakers, but every accent is okay.
So thank you so much for bringing this topic to us. 我觉得这个主题真的还蛮重要的，大家应该有的时候可以去思考一下说，我的口音是真的必须要来改变吗？还是说我为什么要来学习一个不同的口音？ So I really hope you guys like this episode.
Big thanks to Leanne. For those of you who want to find out more about her experiences as an international student, but also as someone bouncing between a few cultures, Leanne, you have your own podcast as well. You want to tell people a little bit about it?
Yeah, I do. I have a podcast named 牧羊人的碎碎念, and it's about students' well-being and also my life as an international student.
For any of you, those interested on how that works, or you have your own family or children who are looking to see what the world abroad looks like, this is a great person to get some experience from. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we hope that you guys join us next time. Bye.
Bye. The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.